Bestsellers are bestsellers for a reason. If you ever wondered how they create such amazing characters that resonate with readers, then look no further, because in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 tips that I've observed mega bestsellers use to write insanely amazing characters. What's up, guys? Michael Aran here with Author Level Up, helping you write world-class stories better and faster. And I create these videos because I believe that each of you has Stephen King level talent and you just need help unlocking it. So if you're new here, consider subscribing and click that little bell, ding, 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 to get notifications every time that I have a writing video. This video is part of my How to Write Engaging Main Character series, where I delve into how to write engaging characters that your readers will never forget. And in this video, I'm talking about 5 tips that I've observed bestsellers use. Now, writers like James Patterson and Stephen King, they're not using magic to hook readers, right? They're using tried and true techniques that if you understand them, then you can start actually using them on the page. But the key is to be able to see them and understand how they work first. Now, these are just random tips that I've seen in reading the works of some of my favorite bestsellers, but there are plenty of other tips out there, and I might do more videos on more tips in the future. Tip number 1 is consistency, particularly when introducing a character. So it helps to introduce consistency because that's something that readers can expect. So, for example, in The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, it follows a character named Harry Dresden, who is a professional wizard. And every book starts off pretty much the same way. And it's Harry in his office, and then a beautiful woman walks in, which usually spells his doom somehow. That's usually how the books start. And there's some variations to them, but the story itself typically doesn't start until Harry's in his office and a beautiful woman walks in. To change gears a little bit, talk about another Harry, Harry Potter. Typically in the Harry Potter books, it starts off at the Dursleys, when Harry is at the Dursleys, and then he has to go to Hogwarts, right? So introducing that main character in the same way, it creates a format. And then when readers understand that format, they start to look forward to it with every book. Tip number 2 is anchoring the reader in the character's head through the use of the 5 senses. Now, this is one of those terms that, you can probably, if you wanted to on a Friday night, watch my channel and take a drink every time I talk about the word 5 senses, then, you'd probably be drunk in like an hour, right? I talk about this all the time, but it is something so critical and so fundamental. All of the mega bestsellers do it, right? Pick up any book by James Patterson, pick up any book by Stephen King, pick up any book by Nora Roberts, pick up any book by James Rollins, Dan Brown. They all do it, right? And they all do it on a master level. And it's the reader in the eyes of the character, through the eyes of the character, using those 5 senses. And learning how to use sensory details is not something that's particularly hard. It's just something that you have to see other writers do, and then you can start learning how to do it yourself. And the way you do that is you become a student of people, right? And you become a student of your surroundings. Now, I did an episode on my Writer's Journey podcast that talks about my process for learning how to write with the 5 senses. So be sure to check that out, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that already. Tip number 3 is for those of you who are writing stories with multiple main characters, and that is that when you're introducing a new setting, do it through the eyes of a character that will view it with the most intrigue. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you've got 2 characters who are racing to stop the bad guy. One of them is a nuclear physicist, the other is not. And so part of the journey to stop the bad guy is they've got to go to this nuclear plant to stop him. A smart choice would be if you're switching POVs throughout the novel, that when they go to the nuclear plant for the first time, to write that chapter through the perspective of the non-scientist character. So that way, that character has never seen this type of setting before. They're intrigued by it. You're going to have them experience it through the 5 senses. And then you can also have the scientist character kind of explain what things are as they're going through the setting. And you can kind of have some back and forth between the scientist and the non-scientist character. And maybe the scientist character is a little grumpy that the non-scientist character doesn't know what all these different parts of equipment are and all these different terms are, right? So you pick that character that has never experienced this particular setting before, and then you put them in it, and you ground the reader and you anchor the reader through the use of the five senses. That's a masterful technique, and it's so simple. And I think if you pick up the works of any of these mega bestsellers that I'm talking about, this is exactly what you're going to see. Another great thing about this technique is that in the scientist example that I gave, when you do switch POV characters to that scientist character, you don't have to do nearly as much groundwork to establish the setting because you did all of it with that non-scientist character, right? And the scientist character already knows everything that's going on, and so it's going to feel more natural when you do make that shift. Tip number 4 is to keep the readers one step ahead of the hero. Now, this sounds like garden variety advice, but let me tell you how I've seen some mega bestsellers do it. So, a major plot point, really, in some of these works, it's not a surprise to the reader. The reader sees it coming. And some people think, well, you don't want readers to be, you don't want to spoil things for the readers. It should be a surprise. But if you actually look at the works of these mega bestsellers, that's actually not what they do at all. For example, in The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton, the first chapter is basically the author explaining how humanity went through a major crisis. There was a major threat to humanity, but it all worked out in the end. He literally says this in the first chapter. Spoils the whole book, right? He says this in the first chapter, and readers didn't bat an eyelash. It's one of his best-selling books. In Vision in White by Nora Roberts, he happens to run into the ex-wife of the hero. And it's a very awkward exchange. The ex-wife is kind of a villain-type character. And so after the exchange, it then cuts to the ex-wife and one of her minions, and they're plotting on how they're going to sabotage the heroine. And what happens in the next chapter? Through the eyes of the heroine, that's exactly what happens. The ex-wife shows up and tries to flirt with the husband and tempt him and do all these sorts of things, but the reader saw it coming the whole way. I know it seems counterintuitive that this would work, right? But if you think about it, think about high-level genre expectations. So in the example of The Andromeda Strain, readers know that in a thriller, there's going to be an existential threat to the world, right? They just know that, and they know that the bad guys are going to win in the end. So Crichton spoiling exactly what happened at the end of the story isn't really a subversion of that reader expectation. In a romance novel like with Nora Roberts, the readers know that yes, there's probably going to be a jealous ex at some point in a romance novel, in a lot of them, right? But they always know that despite what happens, it's just a test, and the hero and the heroine are always going to be together. So as long as you're not spoiling the reader's high-level expectations of what they believe to be true in a genre, I think it's okay to spoil things and keep the reader one step ahead. Now, how you do that is a completely different topic for a completely different video. You've got to be artful about it. Tip number 5 is to mirror form and content. So this is something that you see sparingly, but it's something that can be a really great tool when the opportunity presents itself. So let's say that you have a character who is a painter, and they just love to paint. It's how they relieve stress. And something really traumatic or really bad has happened to the character, and so they're taking their frustrations out on the canvas. Have you ever thought about what that might actually look like on the page? So maybe the character is painting with frenzied brushstrokes, and they're slamming the canvas with their paint, right? Well, what if you use shorter sentences and use shorter sentence varieties to convey that as they're slamming the paint on the canvas? What if we're using shorter paragraphs to describe the inspiration and the creativity that come to the character as the readers are experiencing it? So you think about the character painting, and then you think about what that looks like on the page, and then you have some really cool opportunities to mirror the form to the content to make your sentence structure and your paragraph structure look like what the character is actually doing, which is really cool. And that's something that I've seen mega bestsellers do, but it's a tactic to use sparingly. It's not something that you really should use in every chapter. There might be 2 or 3 points in any novel where you might be able to do this, but when you can do it, and it can be pretty cool to your readers. And to give you some other examples of how you might do this, right? What if a hero is trapped in a fire? What if a hero is at a photography shoot and they're taking pictures? What if the hero is cooking and that's something that they love to do? There's all sorts of creative ways that you can do this. And I've done this a couple of times in my fiction, and it's something that if you look for it, it's something that you can definitely see in the works of mega bestsellers. But the key is that this really is a next level tactic, right? I mean, you have to be doing everything else right. You've got to have engaging dialogue. You've got to be able to write narrative well. You've got to be able to write action well. You've got to be able to really have interesting characters and interesting settings. I mean, you can't just do this one little thing and then expect the results. You've got to be firing on all cylinders, and then this is just that extra icing on the cake. So those are my 5 tips. Those are just 5 things that I've seen mega bestsellers do. I love to read their works because, you know, if they're selling millions of copies, they're doing everything right. And I think we can all learn from that. So there are probably hundreds of more tips out there. And like I said, I might do some more videos on this if you guys like this type of video. So don't forget to watch the rest of the videos in my How to Write Engaging Main Character series. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll talk to you in the next video.
Perfect.